friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to be showing you how to make your own sparkling apple cider, which is basically what I would just call an apple soda. And it's the same way I make any of my natural sodas, and it's super easy. Now the first thing you're going to want is to have some sort of fermentation starter made up, and it takes about 3 days up to 5 depending on how cold it is in your house to get your fermentation starter made. And so I'm going to link to the last video I did on how to make your own, and I'll put it right up here and in the description box because that's where you're going to want to start. Now this one originally started out as a blueberry currant, and it still has the blueberries and currants in it, but the color of them has faded quite a bit. Not that that matters one bit, but every so often I like to either change out or at least add some fresh fruit to my fermentation starter just to help feed it and keep it active. But really all it needs is the sugar. It needs to be fed regularly to keep it alive. And I recommend keeping it in your fridge because then you don't have to feed it every day or two. You can feed it maybe once a month, and then it's usually pretty good. So the reason it looks the way it does is with all the apples coming in and me cutting up the apples and pressing them to make cider, I've been trying to find uses for some of the apple pieces other than making applesauce, apple butter, and feeding them to my chickens. And one of the things I did was add some in here just to get a little more fruit in there. But like I said, the most important thing is to make sure it gets a little bit of sugar, because it eats through that sugar, and if it continues to eat through the sugar, eventually it's going to run out, and then the bacteria in there is going to, and the yeast is going to starve, and what you'll end up with is a wine, and then you can't bring it back to a lively condition. Now what I have here is a cherry fermentation starter that I used trying some freeze-dried cherries that I got from Mother Earth Products just to see how well it would work, and it worked great, but I keep forgetting I have it, so it hasn't been fed in a while. Now I checked it, and it's still a little bit bubbly, which means it's still alive, but it's at that point it's starting to get that strong alcohol smell, and I taste it a little bit, starting to taste a bit like alcohol. So it's time to feed this thing. So all I got to do is add just about a teaspoon, for a little jar like this, is add just about a teaspoon of sugar to that, up to a tablespoon tops. In fact, we'll add a little bit more since it's been sitting so long. And then what I like to do is leave it on the counter, put the lid back on. You want a good tight fitting lid, and leave it out on the counter for at least 24 hours, and then check it and see how lively it is. If I still think it's not quite lively enough, then I'll give it a little bit more sugar and let it sit for another day, and then set it back in the fridge. I'm thinking this should be good by tomorrow morning. Now I've already got the apple cider made, the sparkling apple cider, and so basically all I had was my fresh pressed apple juice or apple cider straight from the apples, and put it in my mason jar like this, making sure I left at least a 1/4 cup worth of space in there. And then I filtered out the fruit of this into a measuring cup so that I could get about a 1/4 cup of my fermentation starter, and then I poured it in here. And then what I did with the fruit was I simply put it right back in here, because I think it's best to keep that fruit in there personally. That's just my personal opinion. Now these lids I got, these I found at my local grocery store. I don't know how long they've had them out. I just happened to be down that aisle and I saw they had these. These are the newer plastic storage lids for mason jars that Ball has come out with. Now these are supposed to be leak proof, and for the most part they seem to work pretty good, but if you do invert the jar and turn it back up, you will get a little bit leaking out. But for the most part, it's definitely better than the other lids that they had, their previous ones, the white ones. But either way, I like the looks of them better. But I do know, I can tell it does get a tighter seal than just the plain old plastic ones anyway, because I'm getting a better ferment on it. So it's important, or I'm getting more fizziness on it. It's still going to ferment, but having a tight fitting lid is going to hold all that in there. You will want to release it every so often to let the excess gases escape out. but that if you don't have a tight fitting lid on there, then all the gases will escape out, and it'll just be like when you leave a soda out, you know, all the carbonation gets out, you know, and then it's just flat. And that's what will happen with this. But the good thing about this is all you have to do is simply put the lid back on tight, maybe add a little bit of sugar, and it will get fizzy again. Now typically this is going to take about 3 days to get a nice fizzy soda out of this, or a sparkling cider as we're calling this. And but I noticed I just started this yesterday and it's already very fizzy. You can see the bubbles at the top. So we're going to pour a glass here and we're going to give it a try. Very tasty. Yum, yum, yum. Now, despite the fact that this is somewhat bubbly right now, I'm going to go ahead and let it sit for another day so it can get fizzier yet. The longer you let it sit, typically up to 3 days, the fizzier it will get. Now again, if your house is colder, it can take longer for it to get fizzy. So just give it time and check it every day. Once it gets to that point, there's the fizziness that you want it, then you're going to want to store it in the fridge. Now keep in mind, it's still going to keep fermenting in the fridge. It's just going to slow the process down, but it will still keep eating through those sugars. So I recommend that you drink it within the first 3 days after putting it in your fridge. Otherwise, especially if you're giving it to kids, because the alcohol level in it is going to increase. I know for me personally, I just can't handle it once it gets past that 3-day point. So that's why I only make it in small batches, because I don't drink a lot of juice anyway. So when I do this, I want to make sure that it's not going to get too alcoholic, and because I try to avoid that. But at that 3-day point, it's going to have such a minimal amount of alcohol, it's not going to be harmful at all, and it's going to be very healthy for you. Now keep in mind, I did not add any sugar to the cider when I made this. There's plenty of sugar already in the fruit for the bacteria and the yeast to feed on. However, if it sits for too long, and you can probably get away with adding a little bit of sugar to it to get it back to its fizzy state, but really this is all nothing but pure apple juice, and then the fermentation starter that I made. And this was made using sugar because it has to have sugar to feed on. So just keep that in mind. Once it works through that sugar, it's no longer sugar, it's now something far more healthy. So anyway, there you go, a very simple way to take your own apples or any other juice for that matter, even a store-bought juice. I've done this with store-bought juice, where sometimes we go into town and while we're in there for the trip home, we'll grab, you know, a big bottle of some kind of the most natural, non-GMO, organic type juice we can find, and we'll have that to drink on the way home. And then when I get it home, because we'll get a big bottle, then I usually will add some fermentation starter to it, and then let it ferment, so the rest of what we drink is even healthier than how we bought it at the store. So it will work with no matter what. So lots of uses for your fermentation starter. It's best when used in making anything that's yeast related, like breads and sodas and even wine, like I have going back here. This is made from apple cider, and I use my starter in that. And I have a whole series on how to make your own homemade wine. And again, for those of you who are new, I don't drink, but I do make wine. It's good to have on hand for various other purposes. I have the playlist on how to make wine, but I also have a video on the many uses for homemade wine. So even if you're like me and you don't drink on a regular basis, it's still a good thing to have on hand, because you can use it in so many ways, even medicinally. You can also use your fermentation starter for fermenting vegetables like you would kimchi or anything else. It's just a different way to do it as opposed to the salt brine method. Some people will like it one way better, some people will like it the other way better. So just find out what works best for you, what you like better. It's all a matter of choice. And it all works. So I prefer using this even for vegetables though, because that means I can cut down the amount of salt that I have to actually use. I've done this with peppers, garlic, and even hard-boiled eggs. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you're interested in more on fermenting or how to use your fermentation starter, just go ahead and look for the playlist on fermenting. I'll also try to remember to link that below, and even up here if I have any space left. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.